Welcome to This Explainer, everybody. Today, we're going to unpack the absolute wild ride that is the US election system and map out exactly what the recent results mean for the entire world. It's a complex, sometimes totally bewildering machine, but we're going to make it crystal clear for you.
Right, let's jump straight in. Quote, breaking news. We are projecting at this hour the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, will be elected to return to the White House. That historic projection confirmed a monumental shift in global politics, marking Donald Trump's return to the presidency.
But wait, how exactly does a candidate actually win this thing? And maybe more importantly, what does that mean for the rest of us? To truly grasp the global implications here, we first have to decipher the rather bizarre, highly complex machinery of how the United States actually picks its leader. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the historic 2024 return, decode the election mechanics, look at the Electoral College math, and then dive into the real-world impact: immigration, tariffs, and climate policy. Okay, part one, the historic 2024 return and what turned out to be a really paradoxical victory. When you look at the sheer facts of this election cycle, it's honestly unprecedented. Donald Trump has become the first convicted U.S. president in history. But despite that, his party won the popular vote, meaning the raw overall number of individual votes for the first time in 2 decades. And to top the whole thing off, Republicans secured a majority in both the House and the Senate, giving them a really rare sweeping mandate across the government. Winning the popular vote is actually super unusual for Republicans in recent history. Just think back to 2016. Hillary Clinton received 48.2% of the vote, literally 2.8 million more individual votes than Donald Trump, who had 46.1%. Yet, he still won the presidency. Sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? Which brings us to part two, decoding U.S. election mechanics, where we look at casting 3 votes on one day. So, on that Tuesday in November, Americans aren't just doing one thing. They actually cast 3 distinct votes. First, they vote for their local House representative in the lower house, which has 435 seats based on state population, and they serve 2-year terms. Then, they vote for their senator in the upper house, which is capped at exactly 100 seats, just 2 per state, no matter how big or small, serving 6-year terms. And that third vote? Well, that's for the president, but it is definitely not as direct as it sounds. Moving to Section 3. The Electoral College math, or the race to the magic number. Here's the twist. Citizens are technically voting for a slate of loyal electors, and the math works like this. First, you take a state's House seats, add its 2 senators, and that equals its total state electors. Take Texas, for example. 38 House seats plus 2 senators gives them 40 electors. Step 2, it's a brutal winner-takes-all system. If a candidate wins the popular vote in a state by even a fraction of a percent, say 0.02%, they take all of its electoral votes, every single one. Finally, step 3 is when those electors officially cast their votes in mid-December. All of this builds up to the most important number in American politics, 270. Since there are 538 total electors across the country, a candidate just needs to cross that halfway mark of 270 to win the White House. That is the ultimate finish line. But because of this winner-takes-all setup, you get a really fascinating dynamic. You have safe states, which reliably vote for the exact same party year after year. In fact, 20 states have voted the same way since 1988. And then you have swing states. These are fiercely competitive places where a tiny handful of votes decides everything. Campaigns basically ignore the safe areas, which leaves the entire global outcome resting on the shoulders of voters in just a few swing states. And in 2024, Donald Trump swept the board. He won all 7 key swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Nevada. By capturing every single one of these tightly contested battlegrounds, he decisively locked in his return. It wasn't just a narrow win, it was a total sweep of the map that mattered. Section 4. Let's pivot to what this actually means on the ground: the immigration impact, visas, and deportations. Get this, 72.3%. That represents the massive share of all U.S. H-1B skilled worker visa approvals that went to Indian citizens in 2023. That is a huge demographic that is highly, highly dependent on U.S. immigration policy. Now, if we look back at the previous Trump administration, H-1B rejection rates spiked dramatically. They jumped from just 6% in 2016 all the way to 24% by 2018. That means rejection rates essentially quadrupled, which threw a massive wrench into legal immigration pathways for skilled workers all over the globe. So looking forward, the incoming administration is promising some aggressive overhauls. We're looking at the execution of what's being called the largest deportation program in U.S. history for undocumented individuals. But legal channels are going to feel it too. Think increased costs and major complexity for work visas, likely delays for family reunification, and even a stated goal to end automatic citizenship for children born in the U.S.
All right, Section 5, Tariffs and Global Trade, and the push for an America First economy.
Let's track how this might impact international trade, looking specifically at a snapshot between the US and India. Back in 2018, the Trump administration slapped steep 25% tariffs on steel and 10% on aluminum. By 2023, the Biden administration had slashed 70 to 80% of those penalties. And by 2024, India's merchandise exports to the US hit an absolute record of $77.5 billion. So while trade has boomed recently, this timeline really reminds us of the heavy tariff penalties that defined Trump's previous term.
During the campaign, we saw two totally opposite economic playbooks. Kamala Harris proposed raising the corporate tax to 28% to fund domestic social spending on things like housing and childcare. On the flip side, Donald Trump campaigned on cutting the corporate tax to 15%, while simultaneously imposing a universal 20% tariff on literally all global imports. It's a massive shift back to an America First strategy, penalizing imported goods to heavily incentivize domestic production.
Finally, Section 6, Climate and the Duopoly, a global and democratic challenge. When it comes to the environment, the incoming policy trajectory is crystal clear. The administration plans to exit the International Paris Climate Agreement once again. They're also aiming to slash red tape to aggressively speed up oil and natural gas projects while loosening pollution and emission standards for power plants. By explicitly prioritizing fossil fuels over renewable targets, they're making a really sharp departure from international emission agreements.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to think about. Is a political duopoly truly democratic? We've just walked through how a system strictly controlled by two entrenched parties dictates absolutely everything, from local districts right up to the climate policy of the entire globe. It makes it practically impossible for a third party to break in. So what do you think about a system where the fate of global power rests on the swing of such a tiny fraction of voters? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And as always, keep questioning the world around you.